It's like the place your hand goes when it passes from your sight into nothingness. Like an empty cube being seen from above or below. Like a set of stairs beginning in the same place they end. Or like a doorway built in the street with no threshold, hinge, knob, or frame. Silent Hill is a game that revels in ambiguity. It's a game about wandering alone through a foggy holiday town, which, without explanation, has been ruined, abandoned, and overrun by otherworldly monsters. The nature of this game's titular setting is told only through non-linear story details, scattered clues, and environmental symbolism. You play as a clueless man searching aimlessly for his lost daughter, strung along by cryptic hints and riddles, often left by nobody in particular or for any obvious reason. The environment itself defies definition. Throughout the game, you pick up various maps to help you navigate its areas, but your character constantly has to annotate them to account for Silent Hill's corrupted state, as many of the paths are blocked off or entirely collapsed. You'll need those maps too because the game's disorienting camera system, low draw distance, and samey-looking areas make it difficult to map anything out in your head. And even so, the game relishes in the opportunity to rob you of whatever certainty you might have, often distorting its world further, sometimes plunging into darkness and changing the weather at random, or even perverting it into the twisted otherworld, a hellish industrial mirrored version of itself where whatever semblance you might have of conventional physics seems to not apply. Here's a moment early on where you enter the bathroom on the first floor of a school, and find nothing in particular within it. But when you turn back and leave, you find yourself on the second floor, at a gated-off dead end. There's not even anything to find in this part of the second floor, and all you can do is turn back. The only purpose of this space is to communicate wordlessly that this reality doesn't operate on an underlying sense of logic, or at least a sense of logic we can understand. The game also loves fucking with you by playing sound and music cues seemingly at random. In this relatively innocuous room, a hair-raising piano track plays. I don't think there's anything in this room that ought to warrant this, but the first time you hear it, you're convinced it's meant to cue the sudden arrival of an unforeseen monster, and it triggers your fight or flight response. But no such threat arrives. I would describe this moment, and others like it, as more or less perfect representations of what it's like to experience paranoia-induced hallucinations, as they have you interpreting danger in places where there truly isn't any. It really has a way of getting under your skin like that. I know I'm not the only one who put this game down in the middle of the night and got spooked by the sound of their refrigerator. The game is so good at pushing your buttons that it manages to be terrifying even with its primitive 3D graphics, wonky cartoonish animations, and bizarre voice acting. My therapist tells me that anxiety arises from a lack of definition or control. When you have an incomplete understanding of a thing or situation, your mind tries to fill in the gaps by speculating or pre-visualizing potential outcomes. So, if you're walking down a dark hallway and you feel there's the potential for a monster to jump out of the shadows, it's the anxiety and anticipation that really psychs you up. In other words, your mind is what makes the horror, not the monster. On almost all levels of its design, Silent Hill revels in horror through ambiguity, leaving the player's mind in an almost constant state of speculation, whether it be about moment-to-moment monster attacks or overarching truths about its lore. I will say that, while this game had me more or less on edge all throughout my playthrough, there was a point somewhere in the middle where I fell into something resembling a sense of security for a number of reasons. For starters, this isn't a particularly difficult game. Granted, I played on normal mode, but I felt that the enemies were generally pretty dumb and easy to avoid, and even easier to kill since your guy has a laser-accurate lock-on, and I almost always had a stockpile of ammo and health that was constantly being replenished just by exploring and finding pickups. On top of this, when you kill an enemy, they never respawn, so you might as well just go ahead and clear them out, especially in places like the school and the hospital, where you're backtracking all around them. It just objectively makes the areas safer and easier to navigate. Also, you learn pretty early on that there's no real point in saving up your resources, since the first boss you fight takes so little damage to kill. It sends the message that if the big bad enemies aren't all that much stronger than the usual pickings, then there's little reason not to expend ammo on anything that gets in your way because you know there's nothing you need to prep for. Another thing is that your character gets a radio at the beginning of the game that goes off when enemies are near. I guess it's picking up their demonic frequencies or something like that. While the sound it spews is pretty unnerving, It ultimately provides you with a bit of confidence since it allows you to gauge where enemies are and immediately tell whether a room is safe as soon as you enter it. In other words, the radio warns you of danger and makes your enemies measurable and easy to predict. If I enter a room in Silent Hill, I'm not cautiously tiptoeing in with my weapon ready in case of enemies. I'm either pulling out my gun and shooting if I hear the radio, or charging forward if I don't. There's not much ambiguity there. I was still feeling guarded as I played because the game successfully planted the doubt in my head that it could suddenly switch up the rules on me, but for the most part it never does. There is a section of the game that takes place in a sewer, where the monsters don't seem to set off your radio, which means you're never 100% sure if there's one nearby ready to jump out at you. Which was a great call on the developer's end and probably spooked a lot of players, but I personally just didn't find that area or those lizard-type monsters very scary for whatever reason. Probably just because it was a boring green sewer, honestly. If it was like an Otherworld variant, it probably would have creeped me out more, but I feel like I've been in this sewer a dozen times over several games. Another tool you get is the aforementioned collection of maps your character continuously accrues and updates throughout the playthrough. I like how there's a gap between what your character's intel says and what's actually there, but the way you chart out the area, combined with the radio mechanic, the easy combat, and the fact that enemies usually don't respawn after you kill them, starts to give this weird sense that you're conquering Silent Hill. That, at least on a thematic gameplay level, Silent Hill is a game about taming a horrific place and overcoming its ambiguity. I felt this way for a good chunk of my playthrough. The game definitely played its fair share of tricks that kept me feeling the horror, but for a while I thought I was really starting to get the upper hand on it. Then, at one point in the plot, some crazy supernatural shit happens in an amusement park. Everything goes black and your guy suddenly wakes up back in the hospital, which you've already been to and cleared, but when you go to save, your file identifies the place as nowhere. Leaving the room, you find yourself crossing a bridge with the camera fixed right behind your character's head as you enter an elevator which takes you to the final area of the game. It's at this moment when that false sense of security bottoms out, and the impression that Silent Hill can be conquered or understood vanishes. Nowhere is a disorienting maze of samey-looking hallways, doors, and rooms that echo environments from earlier in the game, with absolutely no pretense of making physical sense. There is no map here, so it's extremely easy to get turned around, especially since some rooms flat out repeat themselves with subtle differences. At 1 or 2 points, I got stuck and had to run around and check every room I could just to make sure I wasn't missing anything. This area just makes you feel like a rat trapped in a maze, except the maze is somehow sentient and reality is totally collapsing. Beyond taking away your main navigation tool, the game slows its distribution of ammo and health, and starts pulling some deadly tricks on you. In this room, if you take this key item off the wall, a tentacle monster comes out and instantly kills you without warning. Sometimes you'll clear out a room, and when you inevitably backtrack through it, new enemies will be placed there in different spots. Here's the part where you exit a door and a nurse is placed right next to you, within grabbing distance. Here's a room that exists only to hold a key, and it's a pretty straightforward affair collecting it and moving on. But because the game knew you'd get lost in nowhere and end up circling back to rooms you've already been to out of confusion, it puts 3 nurses in here just to ambush you if you come back. There's nothing new to find, just pain. I wouldn't necessarily call it enjoyable to bumble around in the land of nowhere, but I think it is extremely interesting. The reinvigorated vibe of paranoia and ambiguity, combined with the abstractness of the space and its sheer repetitiveness, all serves to make the player feel like they're losing their fucking mind. I think it's commendable how firm of a grasp the developers had on stuff like environmental storytelling, but also on player psychology and the way you can communicate messages through gameplay mechanics, and it was all in what seems to be the first try. If you haven't played the game yourself, I do recommend it if you like that Dark Souls / Five Nights at Freddy's style of theory crafting, non-linear storytelling that's gotten big in the past decade. There's a lot to chew on here if you choose to play this game with a critical eye in between moments of pooping and shitting your pants. I've decided against discussing this game's overarching plot in depth because I feel like that could honestly be another video in itself, and I have yet to play any of the other games in this franchise, so I don't feel extremely confident in my ability to make judgments about what it all means. I just want to point out that even the game's ending is ambiguous because there are 5 endings, and each one provides a different interpretation of what everything preceding it even means. The ending I got, the bad ending, shows your character dying after defeating the final boss. Everything collapses around him, fire spews everywhere, we fade to black, and the credits roll. After paying our respects to the people who made the game, we get an after credits scene. It's your character dead in the car wreck he got in at the beginning of the game, at the very point he crossed over into Silent Hill. This ending seems to imply that the entirety of the game has taken place in his head as he's been slowly dying. The dreamy/nightmarish atmosphere of this game, along with its reality-defying sense of space, especially in the land of nowhere, has been the physical manifestation of a man's mind as it ceases to function, and his grasp on reality collapses. If we follow this line of thinking, we can conclude that Silent Hill, the setting, represents the liminal space between life and death. The other endings to this game are completely and intentionally contradictory to this conclusion, though. The two good endings of the game have your character supposedly escaping Silent Hill through a portal, holding his reincarnated daughter in his arms. There is no flashback to reality after it all ends. Your character walks off into the distance and presumably goes on with life, raising the baby in this world where magic and demons actually exist. The environments you've played through, as well as the monsters within them, have all been manifestations of your daughter's nightmares, made physical as she's been drawn into a plot involving a satanic cult and elder deities. There's more to it than that, but my point is, by the logic of this ending, all the otherworldly and nonsensical stuff that happens in Silent Hill can be explained through magic and the occult. Everything has been literally happening. It's not just the outcome that's different, it's the underlying premise of the story that's different. There's also the bad plus ending, which is so inconclusive that it could probably fall on either side of this rift. And then there's the UFO ending, which throws out everything and has the main character getting abducted by little gray aliens. It's supposed to be a joke ending, but I'm sure there is at least one person out there who would actually genuinely argue that this is the true ending of Silent Hill, and the fact that that person can hypothetically exist is a testament to this game's dedication to the concept of ambiguity. Silent Hill is like playable psychosis. Both its overarching narrative and its gameplay sections have you constantly questioning what's real and what's not. I've always admired the Silent Hill franchise from afar, enjoying its visual aesthetics and music, but after having played its first installment, I can even more so appreciate how it's impacted the horror genre, especially within this medium. Even if it's not the most polished or riveting game to play, its game design is something to be applauded even today. I'll definitely be playing more Silent Hill games sometime in the future, but for now, my nerves need a break. Adios, Crank Squad Nation. I'll catch you on the other side.
Hey Joey, it's your Uncle Beppo. Just calling to let you know that the store's closed today because there's damn fog and snow. Bunch of bad things that skinless dogs do. Brooklyn's crazy today. Is your mother home? I need to be with her, or speak with her.